Hello, and welcome to another video from Ellensburg Amplifier Repair and Service here in Central Washington. And today I am going to be fixing a power supply for a Stetsom DSP. It came in with a no power condition. And I've already done my diagnosing. I had to order some parts for this, but I already did my diagnosing. It did have an open fuse here, an SMD fuse, and it also has a shorted power supply transistor. This is just your typical power supply, an SG3525 driving 2 transistors here to drive the transformer. I've already desoldered the capacitor because I'm going to use hot air to pull those transistors. So I've already desoldered that capacitor to get that out of the way so I don't do any damage to the capacitor. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use just a straight razor blade here. Then I'm going to lean it up right against the display board. What this is going to do is it's going to deflect the heat away from the other components as I use the hot air to remove those transistors. Hopefully, if it all works the way it should, the thing should the parts should desolder fairly nice without doing any form of damage to anything else. What you do want to watch for is when you're using hot air is where's your hot air going to go, what's it going to affect. So you'll see that I like to use razor blades because they're metal, they conduct the heat away from wherever the hot air is, and of course I don't want it to melt my mat for this transistor that's right on the edge of the board. So I will fire up my hot air station here, and we're going to go ahead and pull these transistors. And I'm going to replace both of them. Just like that. Literally just takes a few seconds. And sorry guys, I'll let the hot air station cool itself down to turn off. And then I just remove the razor blades with my tweezers, of course, because those get pretty hot. And now we just have an open spot here to put new transistors in. Just letting that ST862 cool down here from Atten. There we are, perfect. That way you guys can hear me a little bit better. So I am using some IRFL014N transistors in place of the OEM transistors, which is noted by Stetsom to do. So that is what I have ordered. And then of course the fuse, I had to order the fuse. Which is a 750 milliamp 33 volt fuse, which goes right here in this spot. During my initial diagnosing, I pulled the fuse because I didn't have any 12 volts to my battery test point here. So I knew the fuse was open, but what I did is I put a small jumper wire, so small I don't even think you can see it on camera, but small enough to where if there was a dead short somewhere, it would open that piece of wire. And that's when I found that this transistor here had a direct short across it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean off the old solder. A little bit of Amtech flux there. A little bit of solder braid. solder wick, whatever you guys want to call it. I have my hackle fired up and ready to go. I'm just going to remove this solder because most likely it's going to be lead free. As pretty much anything nowadays is lead free. And you know us repair guys, we like a little lead in our solder. And I probably should do the same for the little fuse location here. Little Amtech flux. The best flux that I've used, that I've found, is the Amtech flux, as long as it's original. And I am just gonna remove the solder. Hopefully, if I can get this thing to heat up for me. There we are. And I'm going to remove that little piece of wire. Perfect. Nice flat level surfaces to work with. Excuse the cord in front of my camera there. Oh, don't want to lose my capacitor. This is really just as simple as repairs can get. I get my parts from Mauser. A lot of my parts, you know, my one-off parts I do get from Mauser. And I will get 2 transistors out. And I'm going to get one of the 750 milliamp fuses. There's the 3 components I need to repair this DSP, at least that I have found. And I'm going to clean up the flux that I laid down with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol and a Q-tip. All right, I'm back. All right, I'm going to solder the new transistors in place here. Put some new Amtech flux down, and I'm also gonna put Hold the Pony Express. Hold that. Let me get this piece of wire off here that I put down as a temporary fuse. There we go. All right. We'll get some Amtech flux back on this. All right, let's solder this thing back together. So, like I said, I've got 2 transistors out here. I do have a new SMD fuse going in place. We will use the Amtech flux as kind of a glue to help hold things in place while we get ready to solder things down. 2 new power supply transistors. Of course, they got to be straight. I like my stuff straight, neat, and professional looking, just like it came off the line. Looks good, looks good. I'm going to use my Kester solder to put this back together. So I'm just going to put a little bit of solder on the tip of my iron here. Sorry, my tip of my iron, it is quite dirty. It does need to be cleaned. Here, let me clean it up here real quick. There we go. That looks better. Sorry, guys. Retin it. And now let's Oops, as I keep moving you guys around here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to solder one end of the transistor. Hopefully, if I can get this thing to do what I want it. There it goes. So what I do is I just solder the end of the transistor and the on both of these, and then I go back through and solder down the 3 individual legs of the transistor. Just like that. Make sure it's straight, of course. I need a little bit more solder on my iron here. I like to make sure that there's enough solder on the end of these transistors to act as kind of a heat sink. Because you'll see what I'll do is I'll put a little solder, kind of a blob, right on the end, which, you know, it does help pull some heat away from that transistor. And then I'm going to solder each individual leg down. And then we're going to solder the fuse in place. Then hopefully after soldering the fuse and the transistors in place, then I got to put the capacitor back together. And there's 2 diodes on the bottom that need to go back together. Once I get all that put back together, hopefully this thing will fire right back up. There's the fuse soldered in place. And the capacitor needs to go back in place. Pretty simple. Capacitors have a marking, negative side. Usually on boards, the side that has the bunch of marks or arrows or triangles will be your negative side of your capacitors. And then I'm just going to flip it over here real quick. And solder the capacitor back down. And then I got to put a couple diodes back in place that was originally installed on the board. Sorry for that glare. That glare drives me absolutely crazy. There's one, so you can kind of see how that diode is situated there. There's the other one. Let me get that glare out of the way for you guys. So there's the 2 diodes in place. They go to ground. And I'm just going to solder the 2 diodes. I'm assuming these have got to be some form of flyback. Protection diodes for the transformer. And I want to make sure we are securely soldered to the negative side of that capacitor, which actually is the negative trace right here. Or ground, whichever you guys want to call it. There's the 2 diodes back in place. There's the capacitor and the 2 transistors in place. A little bit of isopropyl alcohol to clean up the flux. We don't like to leave messes, right? Right. No messes allowed. I couldn't tell you how many times I've get amplifiers in for repair and someone has already been in there and they just leave horrific messes behind that I would never leave behind. I mean, sometimes I'll leave a little bit of flux behind, but you just it's best to get into practice just to remove all your flux. That's my opinion. There it is. Everything's cleaned up. Soldered in place. And from here, this thing should power right back up. Let me move this camera up here. Well, my autofocus is turned off, of course. Let me get that figured out here real quick. All right, so I think we should see if this thing will power up. It should. Let me just double check, make sure I don't have any shorts on the board itself. Get that a little closer here. Oh, that glare. Sorry, guys. You can kind of see all the lights that I have above me. There's a bunch of T5s up there. Let's see. Gate drain source. Pull down resistor. We have 1K. Perfect. And 1K we should have over here. Perfect. And let's see here. I don't know what direction. Battery ground remote. Battery ground remote. Perfect. Make sure the diode down here is still okay. There is a diode that goes before the fuse, which hopefully it's okay. 592, yep, looks like it's okay, but perfect, nice. So it's a reverse protection polarity diode plus a fuse. I mean, so this is a very well protected board. And then what I'm going to do is get my power here real quick. So we're battery ground remote. So we're battery, ground, and remote. Let me turn my iron off. Power. All right. So let me just double check here real quick and make sure that I do have my 12 volts now, which I do. Excellent. Before I didn't have 12 volts at my positive battery test point here. So now I do have my 12 volts. So with the remote, it should start up. So I'm just going to grab my little remote lead here. There it is. Stetsom STX2848 is up and functional. So there it is, guys. A pretty simple, straightforward process. Of a repair of a power supply of a Stetsom DSP. So I hope you guys learned something on this here. If you again, you know, just diagnosing and finding the bad parts of potentially what could be wrong with it. Usually, you know, on power supplies, when there's a fault like that, sometimes something in the secondary side is what causes the fault, but this had a clear indication of a little arc right here on the screw, which told me that the DSP got shorted to ground. So I knew kind of right off the bat that it was going to be a power supply repair for this board, which was confirmed by showing a shorted transistor. So if you guys have any questions, please leave them down below. I'm more than happy to help you guys out the best I can. And as I say, stay safe out there. Keep your fingers out of the rails, guys. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.